Okay, chainsaws, if you're going to be a bowl turner, you basically cannot get along without one of these. It is an essential tool to have, unless you want to spend a whole bunch of your toy money on buying prepared log blanks or prepared bowl blanks. There's a turner from Australia, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Joinson. His tagline when he signs off on the forums is, "Anything with sharp teeth eats meat. Woodworking tools have sharp teeth and people are made out of meat." Good words of advice. Chainsaw probably has more sharp teeth exposed than any other tool that we use, and probably the most dangerous. Be careful. Go to the manufacturer's website, check out all their safety recommendations, read all the ones that come with it. Don't just pick this up and start playing around with it. You can seriously hurt yourself with this tool if you're not very careful. This is an electric chainsaw. Couple advantages with it. One, you can use it inside your shop. It doesn't have any obnoxious fumes that go with it. And two, you can use it outside any time of night or day, and you're not going to wake up the neighbors and get them complaining to you. You are limited a bit by having to run an electric cord to it. Not a problem. And also, when you're using this, don't push with it. Don't push really hard with it. You have to let this cut at its own pace. If you push too hard, you'll slow the motor down. The motor burns up, and yeah, I did that one a couple of times. I don't use this one that much anymore because I have a bandsaw that will cut 16 inches high, and it does it a lot simpler than this one. Okay, if you're going to buy a chainsaw, especially a new one, you're better off getting one from a chainsaw store or an outdoor equipment store rather than your big box stores. It is a slightly higher quality tool than you will find in the big box stores, and if you have questions, the people that work in the chainsaw or outdoor equipment stores actually use these. They know about them. They don't have to go look in a manual to answer your questions. You just get a better tool from that. And also, if you're thinking about cutting down a tree, if you have somebody around who really knows what they're doing, they can probably walk you through it and you'll do just fine. If you don't and you think you can do it, all you need to do is go to YouTube, type in tree falling accidents, and if that doesn't talk some sense into you, nothing will. Leave the tree falling to the experts. If you're getting logs from arborists or tree fallers, generally they will cut them up into firewood lengths anyway, which is about what you want for most bowls. And then all you have to do is split them and get them into bowl-sized blanks, and a tool like this is very good for doing that. If you make friends with an arborist, take a blank or two from them, because most of the time they end up hauling it to the dump or it gets split up for firewood. Give them a bowl, give them 2 bowls. They'll call you when they start taking down trees, and if you give them more bowls, they're going to actually start dropping by your house and say, "Hey, I found this, it looks interesting, thought maybe you might want it," and some of them might even want to learn how to turn. Arborists are a good source. If you go to construction sites, a lot of times there'll be trees laying on the ground. They want them out of the way. A lot of the bigger metropolitan areas will have log dumps where they just dump it there and people can come and cut it up. It makes a good club project too if you can get a bunch of guys when you find a tree, and generally there's enough knowledge that you can do it fairly safely without having to worry too much about injuries, and somebody knows what they're doing. It makes a fun group project. But once you start looking for wood, it's everywhere. Okay, sharpening chainsaw chains is really fairly simple. If nothing else, you need to keep several chains handy because you will hit rocks. They do get dull from going through bark and stuff. Most of the teeth nowadays will have a little bitty bevel line on here that tells you which direction to push or what your proper angle is. I always wear gloves. I slipped a few times pushing too hard with my file and got some nice little slices and dices on my fingers. With the angle set there, a gentle push, that's all you need. Usually 3 to 4 strokes is about all you need, and it's nice and sharp, and I do tap it off. And I'm not an expert at this, but at least the guys that really know how to sharpen them, when they watch me do it, they don't break out laughing. I do get it sharper than it was. One of the important things is, as you're doing the teeth, try to take the same number of strokes on each tooth. If you don't, you can have them cutting more on one side than the other. Then your chainsaw starts cutting arcs rather than straight lines, which you don't want. Okay, if you look at this one's been filed down to the point to where I don't care if I hit rocks and stones with it. It's a good one if you've got a nasty piece of wood. One of the things, as you file them down to this deep or this far back, this little thing right here, which is kind of a anti-kickback thing, or just keeps you from digging in too far, this needs to be filed down as well. So your chainsaw supplier will have this handy dandy little gauge. It basically goes over the teeth. You have a flat file and it will take that down to the perfect height. Did hear a story about a guy that filed these teeth all the way down. The saw would cut good for about 20-30 seconds and the teeth were totally buried in. It was just more wood than the saw could take off at one time, but they do need to be height adjusted. That's basically all there is to sharpening your saw. It's pretty simple. Okay, with your chainsaw too, if you do remove the chain, which happens every once in a while, especially if you're taking them in to get them commercially sharpened, I do recommend that you take the bar, flip it over. The bar is subject to wear with the chain running through there. Sometimes you need to have this done professionally because this can wear unevenly, especially if your chain is not properly sharpened and is cutting more to one side than the other. That's just a basic thing with maintenance. And two, whenever you're using the chainsaw, you never want this part of the chain to come into contact with anything but air. This is where your kickback comes from. Tooth is going down, saw blade will go back up. So always cut with the lower part of the blade like that. This is a use tip that I got from an old logger. When you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, but whenever you're using the chainsaw, this arm on the handle stays locked and straight. If you do have any kind of kickback whatsoever, if your arm is bent, you have absolutely no resistance to the saw blade coming back up. So keep this arm straight all the time. Well, welcome to my log pile. Basically, for making bowls, you have to get logs or sections thereof. And the whole art of making a bowl is getting a log and turning it into something like this. So, log storage. I like these heavy-duty tarps. These are basically the outdoor ones, as you'll see, some big promotional events, real estate companies, car companies. I found these on Craigslist. The guys that put them up and take them down sell them fairly cheap. I lay one on the ground, put the logs on it, throw some shavings in, cover them up. Keeps them pretty well protected during our dry season here. And I do put logs and stuff or end cuts on them just to keep it sealed up. So this is a log that's been sitting here most of the summer. No treatment on it. You can see it's got some serious end checking. No problem, it doesn't crack in very far. And I cut off this section just to see how good this is. I have a request for about a 15-inch bowl. So first thing I'm going to do is mark off about 16 inches here. That's going to be my cut line. It is important to get these things down to bite-sized chunks that you can move around, make them easier to handle. So now to cut. Okay, when starting the chainsaw, I always have it on the ground. Some people like that drop pull. I don't. It's a little on the dangerous side. If you're professional, you may get away with it, but most of us aren't. Foot here. Lock the chain and pull. Okay, now I've got it into a bite-sized chunk and I'm going to get it up onto that so I've got a good place to cut it, lay out my bowl blanks. Okay, so looking at this one, this is the pith or the very center of the log. There's one little crack up this way, another little crack running down this way. Looking on the back side, I have one little crack that pretty much matches this one. There's almost always a crack coming off the center. Some old-time loggers have told me that's what they call ring shake. Something standing out in the middle of a field, tree bends and sways a little bit, it gets a little crack like that to relieve stress. Generally for bowl layout, if you want the grain to line up in the very center of the bowl, I would take one like this. This would be a bowl, and get other bowls down here. This one, since it has a crack here and the crack runs this way, I'm not going to worry about grain orientation. I'm going to want to line pretty much up the center. I'll probably take a chunk about this wide out of the middle and then get bowls on either side of that. Okay, so first step, since my cuts are going to be this way, I want to make sure that this doesn't rock and roll while I'm trying to cut it. I always have a bunch of offcuts like this, so prop one under both sides. That'll hold it fairly steady. Step 2, I want a plumb line. So basically this is going to help me cut it straight up and down. Hopefully my cuts won't wander too far away. So off the center, till it's plumb. A nice center line there. I'm going to have to come out about this far to get rid of that crack. This crack's pretty much right on the edge, so I'll leave this about here. These are jigs that I help use for cutting up logs. These are plywood strips, cheap plywood, ripped in 1/2 inch increments from 1 inch up to 8 inches. Basically it makes it very easy to do a parallel line, so I'm going to want one about 3 inches, it looks like, for here. That'll do just fine, so I use that to mark my line. So 3 inches. That's going to get rid of all my cracks. This will leave me room for another one that looks like about a 6-inch bowl. Inch. Leave a little extra room on this side for the saw kerf. I want a 6-inch bowl here. That looks like a little crack right there. So I'll look at that more closely once I get it in the shop. So we have about 1/2 inch for your saw kerf. There's a 6-inch one there. I can get about another 3-incher out of that. Two and a half or so. And then I have to transfer these lines to the other side. So back to the level again. Mark the back side. It's the exact same layout process. Okay, so I've transferred the lines to the back side of the log here. And so just making straight lines across. Mostly this just makes your slabs a lot more even and hopefully parallel to each other, so you have less roughing to do when you start on the gouge or start turning. This one I'm just going to kind of have to eyeball. And this one will be about the same thing, a little mark on the side, and I've got one up here. The next part of the process is going to be to cut these with a chainsaw. And I don't know if I learned this one from Bill Grumbine or if it's one I figured out on myself, and then when I saw his video it kind of pointed it out to me. But when making these cuts, I can cut these end ones clear off all the way, but when I make these I'll cut down about 90% of the way. If you cut this one off, it takes a big chunk of weight off this side, then the log's going to want to roll off that side. Same way if you cut it in half, it's going to want to split in two. So next process will be start my cuts, cut them down most of the way, and then make my finished cuts all the way through. Okay, so now for making this cut, you want your cut to be as smooth as possible. Having those nice big wide straight lines on there helps you aim things up. And the way I've found to get the straightest cut, so this is pretty much smooth on both sides, I'll start the cut here, tip the saw blade down as far as I can that way, kind of eyeballing slightly off to the side so I'm not directly in line with the chainsaw bar there. make the cut go all the way down, and then rock this one down to finish it. I found out if I start going back and forth like that, it gets very, very bumpy. See how well that followed the line down the backside. Pretty darn good. Most of the way, not all of the way. Put that one back up there and finish the cut. Okay, now looking at these two blanks, this looks like this was a branch of some sort in there. That's right on the top. That's not going to cause any problems. This one has a little branch here. Died a long time ago. I don't like having knots or any kind of defects in my bowls. We'll take a look at that when we look at the back side of it. Okay, so this blank, I'm going to show you how to prep it out if you're just going to go straight from the chainsaw to the lathe. One important thing with half sections of logs, you want a flat side for it to sit on so it's not rocking around while you're trying to trim it off. So this is fairly flat. I went a little lopsided on my cut, but that's not bad for my chainsaw work. So lay it down. This one's supposed to be about 15 inches. First thing I'm going to do is draw a circle, probably out all the way to the edge of it. I like a compass like this. This is good for up to about 16 inches or thereabouts. That's fairly close to center. This is like the center of the grain here, but I'm still not going to worry about that. With my warp style bowls, the more they warp, the better they look. And people don't really care about grain orientation. I'm doing a very deep hole here. If you don't have a divider, you can actually put a nail or a screw in there. Take your tape measure. They have this handy little slot right there just for doing that. Put it on there. You can scribe a circle with a magic marker. It'll show a little bit better than this one does. But draw my circle. I really should get a big Lazy Susan for this, but I just haven't gotten around to it. So what I'm going to do next, I want to cut this off. I want to cut this off. And then I'll cut the corners off, leaving just kind of an octagon shape. Cutting the corners off. You want to make sure that these teeth here are dug into the side of the log this way. Basically that keeps the blank from trying to twist into the saw as you're cutting. If you do it this way, you're way farther away from it. It's just a lot harder to do, so get those teeth engaged into the sides like that. Works way better. I also do angle my cuts back in just a little bit. It just removes a little bit more waste. So that's a blank, pretty well prepared for turning. Be a good boy and knock those corners down a little bit too.